All right, for this video, I wanted to cover steps you can take to voluntarily revoke your s-corp election. Right, so the Form 8832, most people are familiar with this. This is the entity classification election, and there's a lot of confusion about when that should or should not be filed. And in this case, if you're simply revoking your S election, you don't file this form. Okay, the 8832 is filed to change an entity's default classification to either a partnership, s-corp, or disregarded entity. In this case, you know, the s-corp election isn't the default classification, and there is no option on the 8832 to indicate that you have an s-corp and you're changing it to something else. So the procedures that you do need to file, or follow rather, are effectively submitting a revocation statement with the IRS. So if you want to revoke the S election, a couple of things you need to do, right? Firstly, you've got to file an 1120S for the last year the entity is going to be an s-corp, right? And that return should be marked as final, which indicates to the IRS that the Form 1120S I'm preparing this year and marking as final, you should no longer expect to receive an 1120S return under this EIN, right? It's because it's going to change to a s-corp. Now, within the Form 1120S, you can include a revocation of s-corp election statement, or you could separately file it. The nice thing about a lot of paid software now is these election statements will be included with the return, but a lot of it really comes down to timing. So when do you want the S election to terminate? In this example we're going to look at here, and I've got a sample election statement PDF as well with another page which we'll look at. We are operating under the fact pattern that we want the S election to terminate at the end of the year and start a new year, Jan 1, fresh as a s-corp, right? So the revocation statement should include a couple items, right? I mean, it needs to include the name and EIN of the company, the effective date of the revocation, and how many shares of voting and non-voting stock is outstanding. And this is important because more than 50% of the shareholders have to consent to the revocation, right? So within the statement, you're going to list all the shareholders that consent and sign off what their percentage ownership is. And then if you have any non-consenting shareholders, you would include those as well. If you're going to revoke the election at the start of the year, which is what we're going to do here, the election's got to be filed by March 15th of that same year. So you have a short little window to get it to be effective for the entire calendar year. So let's look at an example here to illustrate the timing, and then we'll look at the election forms on the second page. So we have John and Jane each own 50% of the s-corp stock in Fake Consulting Business LLC. So this was an LLC that filed an election to be taxed as an s-corp. They decide they're going to revoke the S election, and by revoking the S election, it automatically terminates to a s-corp. That's very, very important. Just because this LLC was by default a partnership initially, when you make an s-corp election, it's effectively a two-step process, right? You're electing to be a s-corp and then subsequently electing to be an s-corp. So if the S election terminates, the entity reverts to being taxed as a s-corporation, right? So it's filing Form 1120. So they want to terminate the election at the end of the year, so they're going to file a Form 1120S for the 2021 tax year on February 15th, 2022. And when they file this final form, they include the required statements, which specifies that the revocation is going to occur at the start of this year. So Jan 1, 2022 means that the entity is now going to be taxed as a s-corp for that whole tax year. Okay, and then John and Jane consent to the revocation. So let's look at the revocation statements. This is the first piece, right? You need to include the revocation of s-corp election statement. So it's the name of the company, address, indicate that you're going to terminate the election, when it's going to terminate, how much corporate stock is outstanding, and then an authorized officer should sign, put their title down there and date it. And then as it states here, you know, you need to include a statement of all the shareholders that consent. So here's our statement of all the shareholders that are consenting. Again, we're terminating the S election Jan 1, 2022. We've got the names and addresses of the consenting shareholders. You should have their social security numbers in there, stock that's owned, and then each should sign it. And then at the bottom, there is a section where you can list any non-consenting shareholders, but in this case, we don't have any. Okay, so pretty straightforward. What's important to remember is make sure to get the timing right on this. In this case, at the start of the year, you have the 2.5 months to revoke it. If you want to revoke it anytime else throughout the year, basically it has to be filed the day of, but you can always make it prospective. So if, let's say, in June 2021, they decide they want to make the election, they want to terminate it Jan 1, 2022. They can file it in June and just indicate that, yes, 6 months from now we want it to terminate. That's also okay. So I hope that was helpful. If you have any questions, leave me a comment below. And I look forward to seeing you again in the next video. Thank you.